Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today I'll be doing a little bit of a box office update because something that kind of slipped underneath the radar for this past weekend with having major flops, especially from Disney's Jungle Cruise, was that the Suicide Squad, coming from DC, the newest DCEU movie, which again, that entire universe is still a little bit confusing, especially with this being called The Suicide Squad, and the first film just being called Suicide Squad. Just find that interesting, is the fact that it did actually open up early in several markets and is already making some box office money. So we'll go ahead and talk about how much money it's made and also what we are likely going to expect to see from this movie in the long term. But before I go any further, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live onto the channel. So, the new James Gunn directed Suicide Squad opened up in 2,409 screens across 5 different markets this past weekend and has made already $7 million, which is really not a whole lot of money when you look at it just as a raw number, $7 million. Again, not very large, but the fact that this is a premiere and the fact that this is only out in select marketplaces does seem to indicate that it's actually a little bit stronger in its opening than it might seem, because 7 million at 2,409 screens is actually kind of impressive, especially with it being in a much more limited market and in countries that have actually been a lot more susceptible to shutdowns and limitations on businesses. And again, I think it kind of shows already a little early indication that this is a movie, especially a rated R movie, that is going to probably bring out more fans in general to go see it versus other recent big budget films like, for instance, Black Widow, which, yeah, people did go to see it. It did, theoretically make money at the box office until you actually account for the amount of money that they spent on the movie. But it at least gives, I think it gives this movie, The Suicide Squad, a little bit of potential to have at least a decent box office run. The only issue that I really find with it is that even though it seems to have a pretty strong opening in its limited release in these different countries, we don't yet know, at least I have not found it yet, what the budget for this film was. And as I've been trying to make clear in a lot of my box office breakdown videos, any film that's north of 150 million or so is going to have a very difficult time making its money back in the current marketplace, unless it is able to be a really strong movie and is also a film that's bringing out audience members. Now, this very well could be that movie. Not only does it have a 97%, I think it's like down to 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, which we all know means nothing because the critics on there are complete shills for pretty much almost anything these days. But also, too, we had someone on the Geeks and Gamers team, Tugs, shout out to you, Tugs, who actually got to see an early screening of this, and she loved it. She says that it's her favorite film since Shazam, and if you know me, you know that the only film I even like from the entire DCEU is Shazam. All the other films really fall into that C level or below, whereas Shazam was a solid B fun family movie that also was entertaining for, again, not just kids, but families. And that's one of the reasons why I think I like that movie so much, is because it's not just meant for a few people, but it's meant for a lot more people than that. Now, this movie, obviously having the hard R rating, which apparently Tugs even says, it earns the R rating. There's a lot of language in the film. There's a lot of violence in the film. I think that this might be kind of this, I guess, formula, you could say, that could actually bring a lot of people out. I mean, it really did work well, for instance, for The Joker. The Joker was just a really good movie, and it made a lot of people want to go see it. That film made over $1 billion on almost no budget, which means it was one of the most profitable films to come out in the last several years. So The Suicide Squad probably won't fall into that category as far as being one of the most profitable films of the last several years, just because based on the number of the people in the cast and the people who are a part of the cast and the fact that you have a giant CGI shark, something tells me that this movie is definitely going to be a north of $100 million film. I would probably have to predict it's going to be between $150 and $200 million and the actual production budget, which would mean marketing costs means it's going to cost, $250 to $300 million. So it's still going to have to make a pretty decent amount of money worldwide, which, again, is not completely out of the pace. But also, this is a movie that is not going to be able to rely on places like China, because even if it does well and gets a release in a place like China, which, again, there's still a lot of up in the air as far as, what movies are going to get released now, in China from all these different markets and from all these different studios, it still does, again, indicate that when you look to a film like Fast 9, for instance, which did really well in China, it actually didn't make a whole lot of actual net gain profit. Again, it made $215 million, Fast 9 did, in China, but it only actually got $50 million of that when you actually take into account the 25% cut that Western studios and Western films get from having a release in the Chinese marketplace. And so, again, it's a pretty good start, I would say. The $7 million on a very small amount of screens. It's a good, strong start. It's a way to kind of build up the hype. It seems that a lot of fans who have been able to see it early are really big fans of it. I still very much have my own reservations because, again, I am not a big fan of the DCEU. Just none of the films other than Shazam have even been really worth rewatching. Everything else has just kind of been this digital noise, nonsensical storytelling, trying to follow the Zack Snyder universe, which I really just don't think. I know a lot of people are big fans of the Snyderverse. I am not one of them. I just think it's just convoluted and stupid. Hopefully this is a movie with James Gunn behind it that's going to be able to be more, I guess, Guardians of the Galaxy type levels of fun. Though, based on Tug's review, it doesn't sound like it's like Guardians of the Galaxy by any means, but the fact that it is still something that is not only making some audience members and hardcore fans like Tugs happy, it's also making critics happy, seems to indicate that we probably might have a good movie on our hands. But of course, I will be watching this movie. Probably I'll be waiting to watch it on HBO Max, to be totally honest, because I'm not a big fan of the DCEU, and I think I'd rather watch it, especially with school starting up, in fact, this week. Got meetings starting today, actually. It probably would be better for my schedule to actually just start watching it and to review it on the channel. And I'm going to give you my honest thoughts. I'm just going to go in and saying I'm not a MCU stan. I'm not a DCEU stan. I'm just a regular person who never really grew up reading the comics, who's enjoyed several comic book movies, but they've really kind of fallen off the cliff in a lot of ways. I really like James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy 1, was not a big fan of Guardians 2, and as far as James Gunn as a person, I think he's, again, kind of a despicable guy. I was not on his side when all of the drama was going around with some of the jokes and really, again, inappropriate things that he was saying. But again, that's just me. So that's not the entire rest of the population. And based on these early indications, it seems like this is going to do very well among fans. And again, probably be a pretty good box office result because of that. Now, this is going to be interesting. It says here, as with the earlier picks, the Suicide Squad is not poised for a China release. And so that kind of answers that question there. So this is going to be a movie that is going to be competing up against films like Jungle Cruise, which is really not much competition because that film made nothing this past weekend, essentially. And obviously, it's going to be, competing against other films that have been out for much longer. And so it's going to be in a good place. It's also going to be in a unique place because it's one of the few rated R big budget films that's going to be out there. And maybe that's the formula for success. Maybe you have to make a sub $200 million rated R movie that actually has fans excited. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? What a concept. But obviously, it's way too early to tell because the early estimates for this movie in the domestic marketplace actually have not been all that good. And let me go ahead and pull up Box Office Pro, because I've done some coverage of this before, and I'll do another breakdown when they have the final estimates going into the weekend, because they again track these things really early, and then eventually they will have like a final update of what they think the film is actually going to do. So as of the last update, what you had from the Suicide Squad was the film was going to make somewhere between $35 and $60 million domestically, and then $75 to $150 million total in the domestic run, which means that this film could very well come underneath $100 million domestically by the end of its run. And unless this movie makes massive amounts of money overseas, it's going to have to be able to make that up somehow. Again, this film needs to make close to $500 million or so in order for it to break even. When you take into account that it's only estimated to make at peak $150 million domestically, and even if it was to have a 50-50 split with the domestic and the foreign marketplace, which we sometimes see, that would put the film at $300 million worldwide. Let's just assume that it's a 60-40 split. You're looking closer to $450. So this is a movie that's going to be very much cutting it close, even if it reaches the highest levels of its estimates to really hit that break-even point. So even though it might still be very popular among fans and actually could end up making money back with home releases, especially if it makes fans happy, it is still a movie that's kind of fighting the box office, which is really not wanting to support these types of big-budget films, because even though they might make decent amounts of money in comparison to the rest of the films coming out during this pandemic time, because these films cost such massive amounts of money, it's really hard for them to actually make any net gains or net profits. And so, again, these are the numbers as we see them today. For Jungle Cruise, for instance, in these estimates, the film made around $34 million domestically, so it did get a little bit closer to that higher end, but it still fell well below the actual total number there. So we can expect Suicide Squad at best to make, what, $50 or so million. Now, if this number gets updated, of course, I will do a video on that later in the week when we have the official estimates of what they think this film is going to make over the weekend, and then we'll have an update on Saturday when we actually have some ticket sales and reviews and reactions and stuff like that to actually break it down even further. But I wanted to be able to get this out to you all today to let y'all know that Suicide Squad is technically out. It's made $7 million so far, and some of you might be happy with that. Some of you might not be. Some of you might not care. Kind of I feel like I'm sitting with this movie right now because I just have not really liked anything from the DCEU, and again, I'll give it a shot. And again, I take Tug's word very seriously because I know that she is a fan, but I know that she's also someone with a good head on her shoulders, and so I know that she's going to be able to, dispel from, the fandom versus like the actual movie itself. And so I assume that is going to be the case with this film being a really fun, good time, and again, rated R movie that we don't get a whole lot of as far as big budget films are concerned these days. But what are your thoughts? Do you think that this is a good start for the Suicide Squad? Are you excited for the Suicide Squad? Again, it comes out this week on HBO Max and in theaters simultaneously, which is the reason why I really do think that it's not going to be a financial success, but that does not mean that it won't not be successful with fans. And we all know that the power of fans, especially if there's a movie that they can support, that the power of fans can absolutely will a lot of films to do much better than what anyone ever would have expected. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the links in the description if you want to find out ways to support the channel or to follow me on social media. That top link especially, it's called Willow, which is coming from Streamlabs, and essentially all it is it's a collection of all of the links to find ways to support the channel. There's links to my Patreon, Subscribestar, my locals. Now we're on Coffee as well, where you can like pay for a cup of coffee or something like that. But again, all of those things are available if you want to use them. You don't have to. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everybody. And I will be having the August Patreon Subscribestar Locals video. We'll have that updated a little bit later today once I get back from work. But I'm still waiting because sometimes Patreon takes a long time to process everybody and everything. So we'll have one last video shouting out the July Patreon Subscribestar members. So if you don't see your name in there and you're a new member, that is the reason why. But I did want to shout out D Sharp, who was a member who signed up towards the end of July. So shout out to you, D Sharp. Anyway, you guys are great. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribestar members: Andrew Hoyle, Biffer de Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribestar members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J. Ra the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And I also want to make sure to shout out my Locals members. I am now available over at locals.com, and I've got 2 monthly supporters over there. The first of my local supporters is Goblin Squatch. Shout out to you, good sir. And also, I now have a second supporter over on locals.com, and that is Robert Barnes. Shout out to both of you very much. Thank you very much for supporting me on that new platform at the Keeper of the Bifrost level. If you want to find out more information about that, go check out my Locals page. You can find the link in the description, and it tells you everything that you would get in that Keeper of the Bifrost level, which is right now the only level available on that platform. And I also want to make sure to shout out any new Patreon members, and for right now, I want to shout out Mondo Spieler, who is my newest member over on Patreon. And I also want to add my newest Locals members, Cats App and The Real
it. Thank you very much for being new members and supporters over on Locals. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribestar as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flickpick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.